If you ever failed to make a sourdough bread, this is where you log in. Not only will I show you how to make a perfect loaf, crunchy and aromatic on the outside, with a beautiful little ear, and an open crumb, soft on the inside, with a slight chew, so even your granny can enjoy it. I'm also going to show you the exact visual cues that dictate if your bread succeeds or becomes a dense brick. Before we hit the crucial step where everyone ruins their bread, we need to skip a few tedious steps you have been lied to about. Let us start with the starter. I want to meet your expectations and give you a few hard truths. Here is the golden formula to refresh a starter hanging around in your fridge. An active starter looks like this: bubbly and not dead. If it looks any other way, you are not baking anything. How to get an active starter? Well, I made a whole video about it, which I linked to in the description. But you can also simply use your local baker for an active starter. If you have a starter hanging around in your fridge and maybe not fed it for a while, we need to do some refreshing. This formula is golden, and here it is. You start with 20 grams of starter. If you had a ton in a jar, you chuck most of it out, or use it in something else. To that 20 grams of starter, you add 40 grams of white bread flour, 10 grams of rye flour, and 50 milliliters of water. Mix it very well and scrape down the sides with a silicone spatula. And if you want, use a rubber band to indicate where you started, to easily tell how much this thing has grown once ready to use. Wait for it to look like this, which should take around 6 to 8 hours at room temperature. Slightly domed and heavily bubbly, and roughly 3 times its original size. That's exactly what you want and nothing else. If it looks flat after 4 hours, you wait a little longer. If it's still flat after 6, you buy a loaf from a local baker, because it's dead. It happens, and life goes on. 99.99% of the time, it'll be bubbly. To start, we add 375 grams of water to a bowl, followed by 100 grams of active sourdough starter. We use metric because imperial ends in tiers, as proven by history. Now for the first lie we are busting today, and one I believed for a long time, when to add the salt. The internet will tell you to wait. It's called autolyse. Delaying salt lets the flour hydrate faster and lets enzymes break down starches. That is scientifically marginally optimal. Of course, the sourdough junkies will now start crying and hitting the keyboards. But you can guilt-free and without a worry in the world add 12 grams of fine sea salt right now. It just means your yeast will move a slight fraction slower, but is one less step to worry about. Give that all a good mix to combine. Before we add the flour, which flour should you use? White bread flour with a protein content of at least 12% is the correct answer. It'll say it on the bag, so don't panic. We add 450 grams of white bread flour, and then we have a choice, which I took for you. But feel free to make your own. I use 50-50 rye flour and wholemeal flour, but you can use fully one or the other. In this case, you add 25 grams of wholemeal flour, followed by 25 grams of rye flour. Give it all a good mix to combine until you have a roughly together shaggy dough. Which brings us to myth busted number 2. There's no need to knead this until your arm falls off. But saying it's a no-knead dough is chemically kinda false. Water hydrates the proteins to form a random gluten web, and we are just using time and tension instead of friction to organize that. We give it a few squeezes, punches, and general signs of love here and there. I have a plastic dough scraper here, but it's by no means compulsory. Now that your dough is looking no better than, 10 seconds ago, pop it back into the bowl. Another little trick is to have a little bowl of water close by to wet your hands. It minimizes sticky fingers, and I prefer it to oil. Roughly shape your dough into a little ball, or simply do what I like to call the drunk cat fold, which is picking the dough up by grabbing it with both hands around the middle, then letting the hanging parts fold in underneath itself. You cover the dough with a wet towel and let it hang out for 30 minutes at room temperature. After 30 minutes, your dough will be noticeably smoother and magically look like you kneaded it until you lost an arm. We will do a few folds. This does one thing and one thing only. It stretches out the gluten, sharing its strength throughout the dough. Why? Because simply put, it has to hold a load of air bubbles. Otherwise, you end up with a pancake. We do a few drunk cat folds, or also a slightly firmer version called a slap and fold. You do this with wet mittens, of course. Grabbing the dough into the middle, gently slapping down the back flap towards yourself, then folding it over away from yourself. Repeat this 2 to 3 times, turning the dough after each fold, until it looks kinda smooth and stretched tight, a bit like the leggings you're in right now. Pop it back into the bowl and cover with your damp towel. Let it hang out at room temperature for 30 minutes. You will repeat this folding exercise 3 more times, making a total of 4 times. Do not lose sleep if you miss a fold, forgot about it for 3 hours, or lost track of how many times you did it. An easy way to remember is to set a timer and use a marker and sticky tape and tick it off every time you've done a fold. After each folding session, you will see the dough getting smoother and stretchier. During this time, you won't see a crazy increase in size. Which brings us to the most important factor most people mess up when making sourdough bread: bulk fermentation. Simply put, giving your bread enough time to become aerated and bubbly. Get this step wrong by being impatient and you will not save it later on. Be patient. Cover your dough with a wet towel and let it bulk ferment in a slightly warmer than room temperature place. If you want, you can also measure the dough temperature, which should at all times during the process be between 24 to 27 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The colder the room, the longer the fermentation will take. I've had a dough that took 12 hours to properly rise, simply because the room was too cold. So put your patience pants on and just wait. It is only ready when it's risen around 75%, or a little less than doubled in size. Jiggly when you shake it and domed at the top. Depending on the material of the bowl, you might also find that it's less sticky on the sides. Once your dough ticks all the boxes, you'll move straight to shaping it. Because ruthlessly, and I suggest you do too, cut out unnecessary steps from your existence. We skip the pre-shape, although technically correct, it's not necessary for a perfect loaf, and move straight to a simple yet classic shaping method. Flour your work surface and carefully invert your dough onto it from your bowl. Pat the dough a few times gently and pop any large air bubbles or unusually inflated parts. This is to ensure a holy but not hollow bread. Pick up the dough closest to you and fold it 2/3 over itself away from you. With both hands, tug the sides away from the center and fold it onto itself towards the middle. Now take the top flap and fold it over towards yourself, rolling the dough up, in effect, towards yourself. The point is to create tension without tearing the dough, but enough so it holds its shape. It takes a little bit of practice, and again, if you get it slightly wrong, don't worry. Like I said, the cardinal sin in sourdough baking is not doing a proper bulk fermentation. And it's not about nailing some fancy or not shaping technique. Once shaped, you flour a lined panettone with preferably rice flour. Get your shaped bread in there, smooth side down. If the seam at the bottom is slightly stubborn and won't close, simply give it a few more pinches. Cover it up with a cheap shower cap or plastic bag and pop it in the fridge overnight for 12 to 24 hours. The next day, you heat your oven to 250 degrees Celsius or 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Place your Dutch oven into the oven while heating. Let it heat up for a solid hour. If you don't have a Dutch oven, then a tray of boiling water goes into the preheated oven to create steam, which is vitally important. And a Dutch oven creates that environment automatically. Your dough is ready when it's domed on top and jiggly if you shake the panettone. You can also do a poke test. If it stays, you overdid it. If it comes all the way back, it needs more time. If it comes back halfway, you're ready to bake. Carefully flip your dough onto a piece of parchment paper that fits into the Dutch oven. Brush off any excess flour with a brush, taking care not to disturb the dough too much. Score it with a sharp razor blade down the middle, at a 45-degree angle about 2 centimeters deep. If you want, make a few decorative cuts, but keep these to a minimum. Place your bread into the Dutch oven or onto a preheated baking stone or tray. Close the lid and bake at 230 degrees Celsius or 445 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes with the lid on. After 20 minutes, your bread would have expanded in the moisture and opened up, showing a sign of success down the middle, into what is known as an ear, or simply the seam you cut fully blooming up and opening. A sign of good oven spring and a successful loaf 99% there. After 20 minutes, take the lid off and drop the heat to 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit. Let it bake for another 20 minutes until the crust is dark brown. Take it out and behold your masterful creation, before putting it on a wire rack. This is the hardest part, waiting for it to cool down. Do not cut into it for at least 2 hours. Cutting it hot tends to crumb gummy and tears will follow. Once cooled down, you butter it up like calories don't exist. Sprinkle it with some flaky salt and a cracking of fresh black pepper. But before you go and do all that, most importantly, go live a happy life.